What you are seeing now is quite normal. These contrails are the trademark of high-altitude aircraft since the close of World War II. You notice that the condensation disappears fairly quickly, much like your breath on a cold winter day. This is as it should be, and as it has been. For those curious enough to delve into the physics, chemistry, and thermodynamics of contrails, this normalcy has a more thorough explanation. Yes, science and common sense do agree, and the balances of nature are achieved with this common phenomenon. And now we must take a different turn, a turn to explore an unusual world that now surrounds us, and yet a world that many of us remain unaware of. The atmosphere of this planet has been changed, and you are now being introduced to one of the main causes of that change. The aircraft at the upper portion of the screen is leaving a normal contrail, and it vanishes as any trail of water vapor is expected to. But beneath it you see an aircraft emission that is stationary, thick, continuous, and persistent, and it must eventually be concluded that it is not primarily water vapor. The environmental conditions for each trail are not exceptionally different from one another, and yet the result and impact from each trail is entirely different. The only logical way this can occur is if the trails themselves are very different from one another, and indeed they are. The majority of the footage that you are now seeing has been filmed in the high desert regions of New Mexico. This is an arid environment with very low humidity levels. It is, in fact, a classic region for conventional contrail formation. Contrails themselves can and do form easily in a low humidity environment, and in the past, the passing of a short-lived contrail in the high, clear desert sky was an innocuous and frequent occurrence. Cold and dry conditions, exactly those conditions that are normally found in the upper atmosphere, are extremely favorable to contrail formation. The humidity levels of the upper atmosphere are actually relatively low, and is one of the very reasons that most clouds occur in the middle of the troposphere, being the lower portion of our atmosphere up to an altitude of approximately 7 miles or so. As this examination of our atmosphere continues, we will be now required to consider 4 types of events or phenomena. In addition to the customary existence of clouds and contrails, we must now consider a new entry, that of the aerosol. An aerosol is a solid particle in suspension, either in a liquid or a gas, and in this case we are considering the atmosphere as the gas to study. The aerosols will manifest in 2 primary forms, as an aerosol emission from aircraft and as an aggregate or collection of aerosols in the atmosphere. A suitable term for this collection of aerosols is an aerosol bank. It is known now that the persistent trails that form the subject of this film are primarily solid in nature and origin, and that they are not predominantly water vapor. A brief explanation of cloud formation will help us to understand why this is so. Clouds, that is, normal clouds, require 2 fundamental elements to form, particles and moisture. Clouds are not suited to form in especially clean air. They require particulate matter, called condensation nuclei, that act as a base for water vapor to adhere to. The size of these nuclei, for the process to be effective, must be extremely small. The size of these nuclei are on the order of sub-micron. For comparison, a human hair is 60 to 100 microns thick, and an asbestos fiber is a couple of microns in thickness. The other essential component for normal clouds to form is a minimum level of humidity. From numerous sources, this minimum is on the order of 70% relative humidity. Notice that the requirements for cloud formation and contrail formation are already entirely different from one another. This is because they are entirely different phenomena based upon entirely different physical principles. Contrails can and should form readily in clean, cold, and dry air. Normal clouds, on the other hand, require higher moisture levels and a particulate or aerosol base from which to develop. The radical transformation of our sky as a direct result of aircraft activity now forces us to address an entirely new set of conditions. Aircraft are now repeatedly dispersing materials into the upper atmosphere at flight altitude, roughly from 35,000 to 40,000 feet. These materials expand rather than evaporate, and they usually transform into an unsightful haze that over the recent years has decreased our general visibility down to ground levels. One of the remarkable facts is that this commonly now occurs at very low levels of relative humidity, on the order of 30 to 40%, instead of the 70% or greater that is associated with cloud formation. And so we know now that these are not clouds in any conventional sense. They are indeed a unique and artificial creation that now crosses new thresholds in the atmospheric and geophysical sciences. There is one way that such a transformation can be made, and that is with the introduction of vast quantities of an extremely small, water-loving metallic salt at flight altitude. This transformation cannot be achieved with water vapor alone, and the emissions under examination are indeed not water vapor. They are solid, and they are well entrenched into your air supply. These important conclusions are at the very heart of the aerosol operations that are being disclosed here. These fundamental changes in the very atmosphere that we breathe have a fundamental impact upon the life of this planet, and these aerosol operations have many potential applications that reduce the sanctity of that life. These operations are being conducted. They are being conducted without your participation or your informed consent. They are affecting your life, the lives of those you know and love, and the very life of the planet itself. Try to remember the color blue, for once it was yours to see. The blue sky is your birthright and a source for joy, and it remains at the very core of our existence. There are factual reasons for the blue color of the sky, which can certainly be traced to the cleanliness and clarity of the air that you breathe. But please do not lose the wonder of the sky itself, the magic and emotions that you have once shared with the earth in all of its glory. These are more than facts, reasons, and observations. They are the experiences and memories of life itself. You can no longer see blue now. at least not in the same way that many of us know and remember. Your horizon has largely turned to white, and there is a very good reason that this is so. These fine, solid materials, or aerosols, are now in your way, and you will see clearly no more. The source and origin of these aerosols is now abundantly clear, and the aircraft operations have now made their mark upon this planet. It is a mark that you must now live with, and that you must now breathe, and that you must bear the consequences of. That is, unless we all become aware of the level of damage that has already been done, and unless we act together to reclaim our planet and its atmosphere. These images were taken in what was once one of the cleanest locations on the Earth, and that is the high desert of the Southwest. You may now see for yourself the daily reality of your existence, and it is a sad change that we have allowed to occur. Please, remember the color blue. In the early part of 1999, a website under the name of www.carnicom.com was created to call attention to the unusual events and effects surrounding aircraft activity over the southwestern desert skies of the United States. The developer of that site was a generally quiet and conservative former federal employee with no political or environmental notoriety. Within a matter of days, it was apparent that this site was immediately drawing attention from a broad host of high-level government and military agencies, defense contractors, research organizations, chemical and pharmaceutical companies, and health organizations. This interest was documented on this same site for a period of several months, by which time an obvious pattern of monitoring the developing research was apparent. Over the next few years, a glaring disparity had evolved. On one hand, a high level of monitoring of documentation, sampling methods, research, analysis, and disclosure efforts was now documented. On the other, a campaign of continuous dismissal of the significance of the issue and a refusal to investigate was conducted by those very same visitors. You are now seeing a small sample of these frequent visitors and monitoring agencies and companies, such as the Pentagon, multiple Air Force bases, the United States Senate, aircraft manufacturers, pharmaceutical and drug companies, national security, intelligence and emergency agencies, weapon and defense system contractors, research organizations, and the media. The United States Air Force is now on public record as declaring that the entire subject of this documentary is a hoax. This assertion was first made by Lieutenant Colonel Michael K. Gibson in August of 2000, when he stated that, quote, "The chemtrail hoax has been investigated and refuted by many established and accredited universities, scientific organizations, and major media publications," end quote. This assertion was later escalated when Colonel Walter M. Washabaugh in 2001 repeated verbatim the previous declaration. Colonel Washabaugh also did not opt to provide the detailed list of the refuting parties. Chart. Since the beginning of 1999, a series of more than 36 scientific, physical, observational, and analytic methods have been used to examine the dramatic alteration of the atmosphere that has taken place. These tests have been conducted with much labor, time, and expense. They have been conducted with very limited resources and equipment, much of it requiring original construction, development, or modification. What follows is a partial presentation of these sampling methods. The diversity and thoroughness of examination is apparent in the work that has now spanned more than 5 years. The officials and authorities have not attempted to replicate these testing methods, at least not publicly. They have not reacted to the results in any formal fashion, and they have not tangibly responded to the many calls for public inquiry and investigation that have been made. The methods and results of all testing procedures are available on the website www.carnicom.com. And this research represents a substantial body of information that may be helpful in interpreting the designs and motivations behind the aerosol operations. Essentially, the method is one of reverse engineering for a global covert operation, and there is no limit to the work that remains to be done. These findings, conducted for more than 5 years, are offered to the public in the hopes that they are or will be of further value in unraveling what is undoubtedly one of the, if not the most extensive operation upon the planet, and the life of this planet in all of known history. These studies begin with an examination of contrails themselves, a very common and ordinary phenomenon involving the freezing of water vapor into ice and their subsequent dissipation through evaporation and mixing. The environmental conditions of formation are studied, the factors affecting the rate of dissipation, the role of humidity, and the expected location of formation with respect to the aircraft. All models that are developed are in complete agreement with the behavior of contrails as they have been observed since the introduction of high-altitude aircraft. Telephotos have been captured in the earlier phase of operations that directly show emissions from aircraft that are in complete defiance of any normal contrail formation. These unusual emissions are not a result of environmental conditions. They originate from the aircraft and can be shown in these cases to have no dependence upon even the engines of the aircraft. The level of incrimination attached to these photographs appears to have forced the development of more sophisticated methods of delivery. An education of the 4 main components, contrails, aerosols, clouds, and aerosol banks, is now required to interpret the environmental impact of these operations. Meteorological studies of contrail formation and cloud formation have been made. The effect of the emissions and aerosols upon sunlight reduction have been made. Visibility standards and their reduction from a maximum of 40 to 10 miles have been called to attention. A study of pH, or of acid and alkalinity level, of rainfall has been conducted by a network of concerned citizens across the country. Halo measurements of the index of refraction are included. Highly unusual statistical results are present in the vast majority of these studies. HEPA, or high-efficiency particulate air filters, have been used in various states to directly filter the outdoor air in repeated tests. HEPA filters will collect materials down to the submicron size, and a variety of unusual physical materials have been collected. Several classes of material have been repeatedly identified using a variety of collection methods. Some of the materials found include the repeated presence of unusual filaments, a gel formation, crystals, and powders. Particle count studies have been conducted using data directly from the highest quality monitoring stations from the New Mexico Environment Department. Extraordinary levels of particulate materials have been directly observed and recorded using simple methods discovered by citizens across the country. These methods include the corona of the sun and extremely powerful lamps. Caution with the solar method is especially advised. These observations have been taken under the most ideal weather and air quality conditions, and they nevertheless provide alarming and direct evidence of the substantial changes that have occurred in our atmosphere. The unusual motion or dynamics of these particulates raises many avenues of energy exploration, including ionization and electromagnetic propagation. Rainwater samples have been distilled to concentrate any solid materials or particulates. Metallic-based materials are evident upon observation. The remaining samples have been allowed to evaporate and then have been examined under the microscope and photographed. Metallic crystal formations have been repeatedly identified, as well as fibrous and granular structures. a citizen has conducted a laser test of rainfall samples under controlled conditions to compare particulate levels. Unusual airborne filament samples have been collected from a variety of locations across the nation, as well as the globe. These fibers are highly unusual in their properties, and any claims of being simply spider webs cannot be substantiated. Samples of these fibers have been sent directly to the Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Subsequent observation of these fibers under the microscope produces disturbing results, including the occurrence of unusual biological components. The United States EPA has refused to identify these fibers. An electrostatic precipitator has been developed to collect particulates from the atmosphere using a high-voltage generator. Electrostatic precipitation is a commercial method of air purification that is incredibly efficient at collecting extremely fine materials. Ionization filters have also produced similar results, detecting the presence of uniform fibrous and crystal materials. A series of deductions based upon the sustained observation of environmental conditions has led to the consideration of the abundance of hygroscopic, or water-seeking, and easily ionized metallic salts within the atmosphere. This hypothesis has been initially confirmed with spectroscopic, or wavelength studies of the light that passes through the modified air. Electromagnetic propagation through this modified atmosphere has now also been introduced as a highly significant topic of research from these studies. Incredibly high mold counts have been found within repeated outdoor samples that have been taken. This result is in spite of the fact that the tests were conducted in an extremely arid environment in the high southwest of the United States. This arid environment has been further aggravated by extended drought conditions over the past several years, also a topic to be discussed further. It is a fact that particulate matter in the atmosphere acts as a transport mechanism, or delivery system, for other materials, including biological materials that can piggyback onto the solid materials. This is in addition to the health risk, including respiratory illness and increased mortality that result from higher levels of particulate matter in the air. It is also a fact that must be reported, despite the disturbing and alarming implications, that unusual and unexpected biological components have been repeatedly identified in a variety of atmospheric samples across a wide geographic area using a variety of techniques. These include the HEPA, electrostatic precipitation and ground sample methods referred to earlier. The fibrous material sent to the United States EPA is especially unsettling, as it was later shown to contain biological components under the review of a medical professional. The best analysis made under those circumstances, as well as with later independent studies, strongly suggests the existence of freeze-dried erythrocytes within that sample. For those who might think that biological aerosols have no precedent, it might be worthwhile to read carefully the documented U.S. Senate hearings held in 1997, entitled Examination of Serious Deficiencies in the Defense Department's Effort to Protect the Human Subjects of Drug Research, along with the contractors that are enumerated within that report. A variety of electromagnetic devices have been developed and used, including a sensitive Gauss meter, frequency generators, and resonant circuits. An extremely low frequency, ELF, and very low frequency receiver, VLF, has been designed and constructed, along with a suitable antenna. A magnetometer has also been developed to study variations in the Earth's magnetic field. This investigation has resulted from the plausible hypothesis that the atmosphere has now been modified into what is called a plasma state, or an electrified gas. Testing has produced a variety of indications that this hypothesis is indeed correct, and that the atmosphere is regularly being used for electromagnetic applications. ELF energy is of special concern because of its direct connection to the health aspects of the electromagnetic nature of human beings. Artificial pulse energy appears to now have been detected on a variety of occasions, and evidence indicates that it is now a part of our unseen environment. Electrolysis methods have further confirmed the existence of unexpected ionizing metallic salts within our atmosphere. Radar anomalies also continue to point to the presence of an altered electromagnetic environment. The testing and sampling methods and results that you have just witnessed are necessary due to the abject failure of the public environmental authorities to respond appropriately to the many claims for investigation that have been made by countless citizens. The responses of the so-called officials and authorities will soon become painfully apparent.
Jet spraying stuff in the air. I went outside, I looked out, it was in the morning, and lo and behold, there was, what I thought were contrails, numerous jets spraying, probably 4 or 5 jets. The contrails were not dissipating, they continued in the air, and I watched. Actually, I was horrified because I'd never seen anything like this before, as it continued all day long. And the result was, within a couple hours, the entire sky was totally blotted out with this messy white haze.
The following is a transcribed interview between Clifford E. Carnicom and Gwen Scott, naturopathic doctor and former CNN broadcaster, recorded in February of 2004. Question: when did you become aware? When did you find out? How did you find out about the existence of these operations and whether they are real or not? Response: well, it's interesting, because I realized that if I had been any place else on the planet, I might not have noticed. And so I am wondering how I ended up in the catbird seat to actually observe this operations. As you know, I live in a very rural area, and when I first moved here, the air was pristine. We had deep, deep blue, azure skies, thousands of stars literally at night. Probably one of the least polluted air supplies in this United States, because New Mexico is a very rural state. Very few people, very little industry. It's one of the things that drew me here. So here I was sitting, reading in front of a 5-foot by 5-foot bay window one day, and I see these jets. I assume they're jets. They're high and they're going fast, and they're not leaving the little 2-inch things that I'm used to seeing. They're leaving those huge plumes through the sky that spread out, and by 3 or 4 in the afternoon, it's foggy. It's so thick I can't see the mountain range. I can't see anything. And it's been continuous and ongoing ever since, to the degree now that the skies are so degraded that we never see deep blue skies anymore. Stars at night are hard to find. Everybody is getting accustomed to the pale blue, often white skies that we live with. But I see them going over, and I've taken hundreds of photographs showing this is not your normal contrail that should dissipate. Question: you notice a distinct change then from the 1990 era? Response: distinct is not the word. Dramatic, devastating, you can pick out any adjective you want. It is dramatically changed, the atmosphere. Dramatically. Yes, extremely distinct. Question: you have a background in the world of journalism, and specifically broadcast journalism. Can you talk a little bit about that background, and also the relationship of the media to what is occurring? What has failed? What has worked? Any efforts that you have made to motivate the media to involve themselves in this, to cover this issue? Response: yes, well, you and I are friends now, so you know that I was in broadcasting for 30 years. I worked for all 3 affiliated networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, in many of the larger markets, and I culminated my career as an anchor at CNN and Headline News. So the medicine part of me was kind of going along as my passion, and so I made my living and had my career as a broadcaster. And any free time I had was spent studying the medicine, because that was where my true heart lay. So I have over the years a lot of really good contacts in some pretty high places in the media. But I would imagine pretty much everybody watching this will know there has been dramatic changes in the media. Who owns the media? The quality of human now being attracted into the media. In other words, Why are they there? When I started, it was mostly all print folk, and they kind of had to tell us, come on, clean up your act. This is visual. But people were coming from the old school of journalistic, afflict the comfortable, and comfort the afflicted. And you are the watchdog, and you go for that story, and you never accept the official version, and on and on and on. Most of the media and information we get now is owned by only 3 companies. When they deregulated, the FCC deregulated, they allowed these huge, like AOL, Time Warner, to gobble up. So you've got these large entities controlling all the information, whether it's film, radio, okay. So the complexion has changed, and I would say the kind of person drawn into it, when it became a place where you could make a really good living, and people would go, oh, I know you, you're so-and-so. It drew people with different agendas. So you don't necessarily have the hardcore, old-fashioned, get the story. I don't care if my hair is a mess. I don't care if I'm dripping wet. There's a few out there still, but for the most part. So that's that. And yes, when this started, I called in every chip I ever had. I called a very good buddy at CNN, who really assigned most of the stories. He was very high, very interested. I sent him your website, a lot of your information. He was high, yay, yay, shut down. And I never did get an explanation. As you well know, I contacted some of our local media people. The main anchor on the local station wanted to do a story, we thought, and we shot a lot of video of the activity. In those days, it was very obvious. Now it's a little harder. You don't have the mornings where you have the deep blue sky, and then the afternoon. You get the pale blue-white sky if you're lucky. And as you well know, that story never aired. Comment. I would consider that a fairly serious, dedicated effort by a media person, and yet we saw nothing come of it. Response. Nothing came of it. Exactly. As you well know, the USA Today, which is an international publication, did a story on it, but it was obviously with an agenda, basically poking fun at those goofy people who saw those things. I believe there was 1 or 2 credible people interviewed, but for the most part, the reporter started out with an agenda to sort of mock, make fun of those people who were seeing things in the sky. And if I had a dime for everybody else that they called, wrote, or begged, I could at least buy an ice cream cone. To no avail, just hitting a wall. Comment. And this was with all your connections. Response. This is with years of connections. It's unprecedented in my life. And I cannot name another story. People point to Watergate as this big watershed cover-up. I find that laughable. This, in my opinion, is the biggest story, and I approached many of my colleagues this way. This is the biggest story in recorded human history. You have an entire planet now covered with whatever by whoever, and nobody's even acknowledging it. What the heck is going on, and how come we don't know? Question. That's the question. What could explain that level of refusal? Response. A few things, okay? A few things, to be fair. Fear. I saw that. Fear. Because the folks that get it know who's doing it, and they're afraid. Okay? They know it's something bigger than them. They know all the possibilities of who is able to put planes in the sky. That many, every day, 24/7. It doesn't take a nuclear physicist to figure out that it's not the guy around the corner. This is big. Comment. So even the journalist has that threshold that they're unwilling to cross. Response. Oh yeah. Afraid. And the few that are left who do catch on to it and say, wow, I want to do this story, like we were just discussing. They hit a wall somewhere, and I'm never told where it is. I don't know if it's the news director. I don't know if it's the station manager. I don't know who. But they hit that brick wall, and it goes away. After confronting the reality of the changes that have been made to the planet, it is a natural question to ask, why? Why would anyone want to? And who would want to alter the very air that we all breathe? we may never know the true answers to these questions, as the evidence is now clear that the aerosol operations are a covert operation, an operation that is never to be openly discussed or disclosed using the traditional channels of a free and democratic society, an operation that will never ask for your consent or for your participation, and that will be conducted regardless of your concern. The answers, especially as to why, do not appear to be simple or restricted to a single purpose. The more that is understood about the nature and potential of the operations, the more complex the picture appears. What can be done, however, is to use the vast body of evidence that has been collected at a grassroots level to make interpretations that are at least consistent with this data. This has been done, and there are now 5 major areas of endeavor that are in agreement with the observations, data, and analysis that extends for more than 5 years. These are: number 1, environmental engineering, modification, and control; 2, electromagnetic operations; 3, military operations; 4, biological operations; and 5, planetary and geophysical change itself. These areas are not mutually exclusive to one another. There is an overlap that can make it difficult to discern where one program may start and another end. It is quite possible that any, and indeed likely that many or all of these operations are being conducted concurrently. What can be done within this brief segment is to explain how and why these types of programs are consistent with the broad spectrum of evidence that is now available to examine. First, with respect to environmental engineering, modification, and control, the evidence now shows that the very physical nature of the atmosphere has been changed. The best information leads to the conclusion that a hygroscopic, or water-seeking salt, is a dominant component of the aerosols that have been introduced. It is also an observation that has been confirmed over and over, and this is that the operations frequently, if not usually, are conducted in advance of approaching moisture and storms. These salts have the usual effect of locking up that moisture with the solid particles, and to generally reduce the impact of, frequency of, and the amount of moisture that reaches the ground. This is one of the simplest interpretations that can be made that is supported by countless observations, and this is that the moisture levels of weather systems have been altered. It may be no coincidence whatsoever that drought is now commonplace and widespread, and that the moisture of the planet is becoming an increasingly precious and sought-after resource. There are those who make claims that the aerosol operations have an intended benevolent objective to mitigate the effects of global warming. It is also apparently accepted within that same claim that it is best that such an intention not be internationally discussed in public, and that you are best off not knowing about it. Unfortunately, the data does not support the contentions of benevolence that have been made, and in fact, the majority of the data can be considered to have detrimental and potentially disastrous consequences to the life and ecology of this planet, including humans. Furthermore, the vast majority of elements and substances under examination will actually increase the heat levels of the lower atmosphere rather than decrease it when they are placed into it. This is exactly what the observations themselves support, and that is that drought conditions are exacerbated and aggravated by the introduction of the aerosols and not mitigated, as many might choose to believe. In addition, there are many more complicated aspects of environmental control that are possible with the use of conductive aerosols, including the modification of the electrical nature of the atmosphere, as well as thermal instabilities induced by interactions with the magnetic field of the Earth. Storms depend upon the electrical exchanges that take place within the atmosphere. Lightning is the result of electrical imbalances that occur in the electrical fields between the Earth and the atmosphere, altering the collection and distribution of rainfall, interfering with the electrical exchange of energy and producing thermal or heat instabilities. All of these point to a very realistic assessment that environmental modification and control is likely a fundamental agenda within the aerosol operations. The United States Air Force has publicly disclosed a doctrine of owning the weather, and yet a world that many of us remain unaware of. The atmosphere of this planet has been changed, and you are now being introduced to one of the main causes of that change. The aircraft at the upper portion of the screen is leaving a normal contrail, and it vanishes as any trail of water vapor is expected to. But beneath it you see an aircraft emission that is stationary, thick, continuous, and persistent, and it must eventually be concluded that it is not primarily water vapor. The environmental conditions for each trail are not exceptionally different from one another, and yet the resultant impact from each trail is entirely different. The only logical way this can occur is if the trails themselves are very different from one another, and indeed they are. Take your breath on a cold winter day. This is as it should be, and as it has been. For those curious enough to delve into the physics, chemistry, and thermodynamics of contrails, this normalcy has a more thorough explanation. Yes, science and common sense do agree, and the balances of nature are achieved with this common phenomenon. And now we must take a different turn, a turn to explore an unusual world that now surrounds us. As this examination of our atmosphere continues, we will be now required to consider 4 types of events or phenomena. In addition to the customary existence of clouds and contrails, we must now consider a new entry, that of the aerosol. An aerosol is a solid particle in suspension, either in a liquid or a gas, and in this case we are considering the atmosphere as the gas to study. The aerosols will manifest in 2 primary forms, as an aerosol emission from aircraft and as an aggregate or collection of aerosols in the atmosphere. A suitable term for this collection of aerosols is an aerosol bank. It is known now that the persistent trails that form the subject of this film are. The majority of the footage that you are now seeing has been filmed in the high desert regions of New Mexico. This is an arid environment with very low humidity levels. It is, in fact, a classic region for conventional contrail formation. Contrails themselves can and do form easily in a low humidity environment. And in the past, the passing of a short-lived contrail in the high, clear desert sky was an innocuous and frequent occurrence. Cold and dry conditions, exactly those conditions that are normally found in the upper atmosphere, are extremely favorable to contrail formation. The humidity levels of the upper atmosphere are actually relatively low, and is one of the very reasons that most clouds occur in the middle of the troposphere, being the lower portion of our atmosphere up to an altitude of approximately 7 miles or so. What you are seeing now is quite normal. These contrails are the trademark of high-altitude aircraft since the close of World War II. You notice that the condensation disappears fairly quickly, much like